Hey guys, what is going on? It is Brook, or the Undead DM. I'm back at it again for another video, and in the second episode of this rant series that I have began, I'd like to start with saying that I'm not a game designer. As much as I aspire to be one, I would love to design my own game at some point. In fact, I did start, but I have since put that on hold, as stated in my last video. Apologies. But I am not a game designer. As much as I would love to, I am not. These are merely my thoughts as they come into my mind. And though some of them may be appealing to some of you, some of you may disagree. That's perfectly okay. These are just what comes to my mind at any given time. So without further ado, let's get started. So what came to my mind as a person who makes a lot of content for 5th edition, my primary expertise is subclasses and magic items and such. What I've found is that 5th edition, the way it has been constructed and the way it has been built as a system, it is heavily conducive to homebrewing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like Cyrock said in one of his videos, not all homebrew is bad. There is actually a lot of good homebrew that I've actually reviewed prior onto this channel, mainly things from the Foxtail Foundry as well as Targon's Heroic Fighter. Both are really good, and this is true. And that there are some garbage homebrew out there, like I've shown with a lot of the other homebrew review videos, where a lot of the homebrew seems to be not very well thought out, or they have an idea and the mechanics just don't work well, whatever have you. Well, that's what I want to talk about today. Is a system being built upon the premise of players making their own rules, making their own content for the game, considered a good practice, a good move on the part of the company? Now, I can't speak for anything in terms of revenue or player engagement or anything of the such. But what I can say is that there's a reason that Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2 have such, even now, high player numbers for an almost 15-20-year-old game. And it's the ease of access of applying and running mods. It's player-made content. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think is what's really keeping the game alive. But a game as old as 5th edition, where it's not the matter of the content being bad or being good. It's a matter of that it is a game in which mechanics and classes and such have to be run by a non-biased third party prior to it ever being allowed. Because you see, in Left 4 Dead 2, it's open source. All you have to do is find the source code for whatever you're trying to mod, and then once you have it, you can mod it however you like, and then put it onto the Steam Workshop, and people can download it as they want. It will, if you are hosting the game, it'll forcefully download something like that to allow other players to see the mod that you have installed. But other than that, it's a simple, you just click the green plus button and it's on the game. There's no third party that it has to go to where everybody has to agree that this mod is what you're going to be using. Granted, there are some servers that have certain checks in place that don't allow certain mods, but those are very few and far between. They're primarily like private groups between friends, and that they only want certain mods running this way their game doesn't crash, which is fine. But I think TTRPGs, specifically 5th edition, and pretty much any other system that's built upon the 5th edition engine, is very reliant on, well, I wouldn't say reliant, but it's it heavily emphasizes the use of homebrew. It doesn't give you a lot of content in the base rulebook. They've since come out with much more content, not as much as other editions, but they've come out with decent amounts of content past that, past the initial player's handbook. The problem being is that the content in the books isn't really substantial enough. Because think about it for a second. In 4th edition, they had at least, if we're just not counting the essentials classes, because God, who would ever play those except for like new players? But outside of the essentials classes, how many classes did 4th edition have? It had like 8 in the base rulebook, then it had like 5 or 6 per player's handbook after that, and then they added the artificer in another book, and then they had the essentials classes, and then they had other classes that came out in other books and stuff, and not to mention there is a homebrew scene for 4th edition. But 4th edition has a much more constrained homebrew because you got to be very careful of the numbers. Because if you make a power too strong at a certain level, then it's obviously the one that you take. It's similar to Fireball in that way, where in 5th edition, if you are a 5th level caster and have access to Fireball, you take Fireball because it is the most damaging, useful damaging spell in the 3rd level slot. It has a big area, does a lot of damage. But people will argue, well, Lightning Bolt does the same thing. It does the same damage. Yeah, but it's in a line. So, realistically, how often are you going to be in a scenario where the enemies that you're trying to fight are lined up perfectly in a straight line? Not a lot. But with Fireball, you just designate an area, and anything within 40 feet of that area just gets blown up. You don't really have to think very much. You just pick an area, you measure it out, and you try to see how many creatures you could fit into the sphere before you're like, well, that just might be too much. Like, that just might be too much, maneuvering to get the Fireball to work. But even then, if you do it, that's a big payoff. But in 4th edition, they don't really have that. If you make a power at 5th level like Fireball, where it does 8d6, it's going to be the only one you pick. But if you bump it up a level, it might be too weak compared to others. That's just a drastic example. I haven't thought of anything or made any homebrew for 4th edition that could possibly fit into that criteria, but I'm getting off track. In 4th edition, they had so many classes. Not to mention each class had at least like 8 different builds. Each class had their own paragon paths. Sometimes they had multiple, or most of the time they actually had at least 4 paragon paths, if not more, and then each one also had at least 2 epic destinies that you could pick from. And some of the epic destinies weren't even class restricted, they were just level restricted. So you could take Demigod as any level 21 class. You could just do that. And sure, you could go an Archmage or an Archwizard, whatever it's called, in the Player's Handbook 1 if you're a 21st level wizard, but you didn't have to. You could go anything else that your 21st level wizard would have the prerequisites met for. But in 5th edition, there isn't really anything but homebrew at this point. Because right now, Wizards of the Coast is focusing on 1D&D. And with 1D&D kind of being their new baby and all, they're kind of, for all intents and purposes, ending support for 5th edition. Which makes sense, because when you think about it, Paizo, the company who made Pathfinder, when they stopped supporting 3rd edition, 3.5, Paizo came along and they supported the 3.5 style game with Pathfinder 1st edition for a good long while. They kept it going for 10 years. So from 2009 all the way up to 2019, they kept it going. And then they released Pathfinder 2nd edition, which was similar to 4th edition when they stopped supporting that format and they started going to the 5th edition format. And so, with 5th edition being their new child, or with the 1D&D being Wizards of the Coast's new baby, I wouldn't be surprised if later on this year, in 2024, they're going to release 1D&D as, like, Dungeons and Dragons 6th edition, and just be, look, it's a new game, and then not change anything about it at all. Like, they've made pretty decent changes, pretty okay changes, pretty bad changes, abysmal changes, but they haven't fundamentally changed anything about it in 5th edition. Everything that was bad about 5th edition has been mostly carried over. It's just 5.5. That's all it is. They realized how bad they screwed up with 5th edition, and instead of just writing a whole new system to try and fix it, they just took the old system and they went back and actually did their jobs and proofread the thing, and now they're trying to fix it, but it's too late. Nobody cares about 5th edition anymore. Well, let me rephrase. Veteran players don't care about 5th edition anymore. They realize that 5th edition isn't going to get any better, 1D&D isn't going to fix any of the problems, so they're going back to either editions that they know, they trust, and they love, or they're trying different systems to kind of get what they want out of a TTRPG that D&D no longer suffices. Like, when 5th edition came out, everyone was so excited about it, because it was new. Even me, I was excited about it, because I started watching Critical Role, I saw what they were doing, I wanted to do the same thing. So I was excited for 5th edition. But now, 5th edition just kind of bores me. It's boring. Sure, being overpowered in 5th edition is fun, but it's boring because you take the same steps to get there every single time. You want to be overpowered? Just play any full caster. Play a cleric, play a wizard, play a sorcerer. Doesn't matter. Just play anybody who has 9th level spells. And guess what? You're golden. Because you get access to some of the best spells in the game, the most overpowered things in the game. There's really no restriction for you multiclassing full casters at all. You just get an expanded spell list. That's it. But in 4th edition, there were very concrete things that made each build or each way you wanted to go overpowered in its own right. Like, sure, I'm going to use this as an example because it's the only character I've made so far. Sure, a 2-weapon fighter is not going to be as strong as a 2-weapon ranger in terms of damage, and it's not going to, like, say, outdamage a two-handed weapon fighter, but it's going to have unique things that allow it to attack more targets, and thus kind of allow it to basically double its damage output in certain situations. It's really good for that. It won't be putting in as much damage as the ranger, but it won't also be so abysmally bad compared to the two-handed fighter that it's going to be like a non-thing. You don't want to play that. Every build in 4th edition is at least somewhat viable in some regard. I like to quote this video that another person made in regards to Puffin Forrest's 4th edition video, where they said that fighters are the single target defenders. If you are ever in a predicament where it is you versus one other guy, a fighter is who you want. That is their goal. That is their job. Now, if there are multiple targets, you may want a warden. You may want someone like that, where they can handle a lot of enemies at once. That's who you want. But I digress. I just think the way 5th edition is constructed, having its reliance be, its survival be on homebrew that is either really, really good or really, really bad, is not a good model, because you're keeping the volatile player base, which can easily just drop your hobby and stop paying for it, stop buying stuff from you whenever they want. You're taking that volatile player base that you rely on and giving it to the populace. And so if a DM allows some bad homebrew, yeah, that's his fault. But now you've lost him, you lost maybe some of his players, and those are potential customers you're losing. So, do I think giving creative abilities to the audience is a bad thing? No. Do I think that in a TTRPG, having an entire game system be built on the logic that homebrew equals good, and homebrew should be encouraged to be sold without any form of proofreading, without any form of quality control on Wizards' part, be okay? No. I think there should be some level of quality control, but it shouldn't be on the level of D&D Beyond, where you can't make anything that isn't within their own parameters. But then again, I also don't think it should be a lawless land like it is in DM's Guild, where the DM's Guild staff doesn't go through any of the homebrew that's posted. They just say, well, if you're going to post homebrew here, just put our little symbol in the bottom of the corner of your cover page of your homebrew, and you're set. So you have people like Ross Leiser and Benjamin Huffman, who are making, quite honestly, they're making pretty hardy homebrew where it's got a lot of content, but it's skin deep. The pugilist, the sculptor, the shaman, a lot of these classes, they're just skin deep. They build them in the same way that the designers built 5th edition. They took an idea, they took the flavor of the idea, they started with that, and then they built the mechanics after that. They didn't start with the mechanics first and then build up to that. And honestly, I'm guilty of it too. All my homebrew is built with an idea first, mechanics second. It should be the other way around. But 5th edition doesn't tell you otherwise. Wizards of the Coast doesn't tell you otherwise. The mechanics don't penalize you for it at all. But that's just my rant for today. So, thank you.